Have you ever felt ashamed of your sexual desire? Have you ever believed that wanting someone meant you were doing something wrong? If so, you're not alone. Desire has been misunderstood for centuries, wrapped in guilt, buried under silence, or disguised as virtue. But today, let us look at it through the eyes of the Buddha. Because the truth is both liberating and difficult to accept. Sexual desire is not a sin. It is not evil. It is not something to be exiled from the human experience. But it is a test, a mirror. It reveals not what is wrong with us, but where we are still clinging, still seeking, still confusing craving with love. Welcome, dear soul. This is Lotus of Dharma, a sanctuary for seekers of inner truth, for those walking the path not of suppression, but of mindful transformation. Before we go deeper, take a moment to support this space, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because today's video contains not just teachings, but a shift in perception that may change how you see desire, and how you see yourself. Now, let's uncover what the Buddha truly taught about sensual longing, and how to meet it not with fear, not with shame, but with understanding, awareness, and grace. Sexual desire is not a sin, but a mirror. The Buddha never condemned desire. He never claimed that to feel longing was shameful or that the presence of sexual thoughts made one impure. On the contrary, he understood, with a heart vast and compassionate, that to be human is to feel, to be born into a body of senses, moved by the winds of contact, emotion, memory, and craving. The mistake is not in the arising of desire, but in misunderstanding its nature. In the Kama Sutta, the Buddha did not speak against pleasure itself. He acknowledged it as a natural part of life, a pull that arises with being alive. There is no sin in recognizing beauty or in feeling drawn toward intimacy. But he offered a profound caution: pleasure is not the problem, attachment to it is. Like a flame, pleasure gives light, warmth, and even comfort. But if you try to grasp it with a closed fist, you'll burn. This is the essence of Buddhist wisdom on desire. It asks not for denial, but for clarity. To experience sexual desire is not a failure of your practice. It is an opportunity. A moment of truth. When desire arises, we are offered a mirror, not to judge ourselves, but to see more clearly the habits of our mind. Are we being pulled by loneliness? By fear of being unwanted? By the illusion that fulfillment lies outside of us? Or is it simply a sensation arising and passing, like a breeze across the skin? The Buddha taught not suppression, but understanding. He never encouraged the violent rejection of our human impulses, but instead the cultivation of mindfulness, the gentle and unwavering ability to observe the mind without getting swept away by it. In this light, sexual desire is not an enemy to fight or a sin to be punished. It is a teacher. It reveals the places where we still seek completion outside of ourselves, where we still confuse longing with love, craving with connection. We do not need to indulge every desire, nor must we exile it. The middle way invites us to walk a path of balance, where we see the desire, feel its presence, and yet remain free from its command. When you are able to sit with desire, without obeying it and without pushing it away, you begin to experience a deeper kind of freedom, the kind that is not about abstinence, but about peace. Desire will come and go. That is its nature. But the awareness that sees it, that stillness within you, is constant. It does not crave. It does not resist. It simply witnesses. And in that witnessing, a great transformation occurs. We realize we are not the desire. We are the spaciousness that holds it. Sexual desire is not something to fear, nor something to glorify. It is a sacred part of the human experience, and when met with wisdom, it becomes not a chain, but a doorway. A doorway back to ourselves. A test not of morality, but of mindfulness. The trap of attachment. This is where most people quietly lose their way. Not in the presence of desire itself, but in the subtle way they begin to weave it into their identity. A thought arises, a craving emerges, and suddenly we believe, this is who I am. We say to ourselves, I am this longing, I must follow it to feel alive. And just like that, we become the captive of our own illusion. But desire is not the self. It is a movement, a ripple in the mind. It comes, it stays for a while, and then, like a storm passing through a still valley, it fades. Its intensity may fool us into thinking it defines us, but it never has and never will. The teachings of the Buddha gently point us back to this truth: we are not what we desire. We are the one who is aware of desire, and that awareness, unlike desire, does not cling, does not grasp, does not chase. Clinging to sexual desire, or any desire, is like chasing the horizon. The closer you believe you are to catching it, the farther it slips away. You run toward what you think will bring completion, but what you are truly feeding is the hunger itself. And so the cycle deepens, desire leading to craving, craving leading to dissatisfaction, dissatisfaction giving birth to more searching. It is a thirst that no external thing can quench. Not because the world is lacking, but because our sense of lack was never outside to begin with. If you pause in the heat of craving and simply ask yourself, is this longing bringing me peace? Or is it stirring more restlessness? You begin to see through the illusion. Desire promises fulfillment, but delivers only the need for more. That is the nature of attachment. It inflates hope while quietly draining contentment. What feels urgent now will soon feel hollow. What glitters with temptation often hides the dull ache of regret. But to see this, truly see it, requires stillness. A moment of inner silence where you no longer follow the craving, nor fight it, but simply observe its dance. In that observation, its grip loosens. And in that loosening, something remarkable happens. You return to yourself, not the self shaped by urges and fears, but the self that is spacious, steady, and enough. Attachment is not just to objects or people. It is to identity, to image, to stories we've told ourselves about what we need in order to be whole. But wholeness is not found in the pursuit of pleasure. It is rediscovered in the letting go of pursuit itself. A personal story. Let me share with you a story, not of dramatic miracles or grand enlightenment, but of the quiet kind of courage that often goes unnoticed, the kind that unfolds in the still corners of the human heart. There was once a young monk named Tissa, a man whose life before the monastery had been filled with every luxury the senses could touch. He had lived surrounded by silk sheets and sweet perfumes, laughter echoing in moonlit halls, the music of flirtation and the intoxication of youth always near. When he shaved his head and put on the robes of simplicity, he believed he was leaving that world behind. But memory, as it often does, followed him through the gates of the monastery. At first, he could ignore it. He would sit under the trees, chant the verses, sweep the floor, and pretend his heart was quiet. But in the silence of the nights, desire would visit, uninvited, unrelenting, not just for the bodies he once touched, but for the feeling of being wanted, of being special, of belonging to something warm and vivid. One evening, unable to bear the pull any longer, Tissa went to his teacher, an old monk whose face held the kind of peace that doesn't come from avoiding storms, but from having lived through many. Tissa bowed low and said, "Master, I try to let go. I try to forget, to silence these thoughts. But they return. the same longing, the same ache. Have I failed in my path? The master looked at him, not with disappointment, but with deep kindness, as if he had been waiting for this moment. And then he said something that would change the young monk's life. Tissa, my son, the presence of desire is not your failure. It is simply the echo of a path you once walked. What matters is not that it returns, but that you see it. Your awareness of it, that is your strength. Each time you choose not to act on it blindly, but to observe it mindfully, you are passing the test. Not with perfection, but with understanding. From that day forward, Tissa stopped fighting. He stopped trying to bury the feelings in shame. Instead, he watched them, gently, honestly, as one might watch clouds drifting across the open sky. Some were dark and heavy, some were light and wistful. But none of them stayed. And gradually, as his heart became still, he discovered something greater than desire, the peace that arises not from having nothing, but from needing nothing. In time, the clouds visited less often. And when they came, he no longer feared them. They were not enemies. They were reminders of how far he had come, of how easily the mind clings, and of how possible it is to let go without anger. He was no longer the man lost in craving. He was the sky itself, vast, open, untroubled. What you can practice. The story of Tissa does not end with the clouds passing. In truth, it never ends, because his story is ours. Each of us, in some quiet corner of the heart, has stood where Tissa once stood, face to face with longing, uncertain whether desire is a doorway or a dead end. And like him, we can learn not to fight it, not to fear it, but to work with it, with patience, with wisdom, and with great gentleness. So when sexual desire arises, whether in the stillness of meditation or in the noise of daily life, begin first, as Tissa did, by watching. This is the ground of all practice, to see clearly without panic. You are not failing because desire appears. It is not a flaw in your practice, nor a signal that you are unworthy. It is simply a ripple, a wave moving across the surface of your awareness. You do not have to jump into the wave. You only have to notice it. Pause and breathe. One deep breath, and then another. Desire is urgent by nature. It rushes, it pushes, it tells you that something must happen now. But your breath is timeless. Your breath is your anchor to the present, and the present is the only place where desire loses its power. As you breathe, feel the body soften. Bring the mind out of the imagined future, the fantasy, the memory, the story, and back into the now, where peace lives quietly, waiting to be noticed. Then, reflect. But not with cold analysis. Reflect with the warmth of a friend asking you gently, what are you really seeking? Is this craving coming from love, or from loneliness? From a wish to share your heart, or a fear of being unseen? Sometimes, what we call sexual desire is a longing to be held, to be known, to be comforted in our humanness. If you can see the deeper need beneath the surface pull, you begin to respond not with shame, but with compassion. You begin to understand what the heart is really asking for. Once you've seen clearly, you can choose how to respond. You can redirect the energy, not to suppress it, but to uplift it. The energy of desire is creative by nature. It is a fire. And like all fire, it can burn, or it can give light. You might channel that energy into something that nourishes you, writing, movement, meditation, art, acts of service. You might take a walk in silence, noticing how the body holds tension, and gently let it go. You might offer a prayer for others who are struggling with the same pull, remembering that this path is not walked alone. And above all, you can return. Return to stillness, again and again. Not because desire has vanished, but because you no longer fear its presence. You have made peace with a visitor. You have learned to meet it with eyes wide open. The Buddha compared the awakened heart to the lotus, a flower that grows not in clear water, but in mud. It is not by escaping the mud that the lotus blooms. It is by rising through it. In the same way, your practice is not about eliminating desire, but transforming your relationship to it. Not by force, but by insight. Not by guilt, but by grace. Every moment of desire is a test, not of morality, but of mindfulness. It asks you, will you chase? Will you grasp? Or will you see clearly, and choose freedom instead? And each time you return to that seeing, as Tissa did, even if it takes many returns, you are practicing liberation. Not because you are perfect, but because you are awake. But let us be honest, the world we live in does not support stillness. It thrives on stimulation. We are surrounded by images, sounds, and messages that celebrate desire, amplify it, commercialize it, and feed it in every corner of our lives. From a passing advertisement to the casual conversation of friends, the collective mind often mistakes craving for connection, performance for intimacy, and consumption for love. So it is no surprise that many spiritual seekers, even seasoned practitioners, feel overwhelmed or disheartened when sexual desire continues to arise in their path. They assume that progress means becoming untouched, invulnerable, empty of all longing. But that is not the Buddha's way. The Buddha himself walked among people, not above them. He saw their tears, their temptations, their confusion, and he offered not condemnation, but clarity. He taught us that freedom is not found in avoiding the world, but in understanding it so deeply that its seductions no longer deceive us. Even in spiritual communities, we must be cautious. Desire does not always wear obvious clothes. Sometimes it hides beneath roles, the longing to be admired as a good practitioner, to be desired for one's calmness, to be seen as special. Even these are forms of attachment, subtle but strong. And when left unseen, they bind us just as tightly as any passion of the flesh. That is why self-honesty is the foundation of practice. Not to shame ourselves, never to shame, but to become intimate with the truth of our experience. To sit with our longing and ask it, what are you really seeking? And then, to wait. To listen. And to answer, not with rejection, but with deep presence. You may discover, in time, that the desire you once feared begins to soften. Not because you have conquered it, but because you have understood it. You no longer chase the fire, because you have become the light. This is not a path of quick victories. It is the long, patient art of returning. Returning to the breath, to the body, to the present. Returning to compassion when judgment arises. Returning to stillness, again and again, not as a retreat, but as a homecoming. And in this returning, desire loses its sharpness. It becomes another ripple on the surface of the lake, no more threatening than a passing breeze. And you, the one who sees, remain unmoved, unbound, and quietly free. If you've stayed with us until now, thank you. That alone is a form of courage. Because to look at desire directly, without flinching, is not easy. But it is necessary. You now understand, the presence of desire is not failure. It is a part of being human. What matters is not whether it appears, but how we meet it. We can meet it with fear, or with mindfulness. We can judge it, or we can learn from it. We can run from it, or we can sit with it, until it passes like a cloud across a vast and open sky. The Buddha never told us to become stone. He invited us to become aware. To walk the middle way, not by rejecting the world, but by seeing it clearly enough that it no longer controls us. So the next time desire stirs in you, stop. Breathe. Reflect. Is this craving born of love, or loneliness? Is it feeding your freedom, or your hunger? And most importantly, can you turn this fire into light? If this message has touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who may need it. Leave a comment, even a few words, to let others know they are not alone in their journey. And please, subscribe to Lotus of Dharma, so that this space may continue to grow, to serve, and to guide.